My sister didn't just forget to invite me to her party. She looked me in the eye and told me I didn't belong there. I sat alone that night, watching the city lights from a bench by the river, believing I was nothing. Then my phone rang. A stranger told me my grandfather had been searching for me my whole life. He was a billionaire, and he left me everything. My sister and her husband had no idea, but they would find out soon enough. And when they did, everything changed. Camilla. My name is Camilla. And for most of my life, that name didn't mean much to anyone except me and the small group of people who loved me. It was just a name on a frayed student ID, on a rejected job application, on the lease of a tiny, one-bedroom apartment in a part of town where the sirens were the local lullaby. I was used to the quiet hum of being ordinary, of being overlooked. It was a comfortable, if sometimes lonely, place to be. My sister, Alina, was the opposite of ordinary. She was the sun, and I was a small, distant planet that reflected her light. 4 years older, she had always been the one with the plan, the confidence, the charm that could unlock any door. Our parents adored her, and I did too, from a safe distance. She was beautiful in a way that was sharp and intentional, with sleek, dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. She saw the world as a stage, and she was determined to be the star. When she met David, I thought she had found her perfect co-star. He was handsome in a polished, corporate way, with a smile that looked practiced in the mirror and a firm handshake that lingered a second too long. He worked in finance, a world of numbers and mergers that I couldn't even begin to understand. They were a power couple in the making, and their wedding, when it finally happened, was less a celebration of love and more a coronation. I was happy for her, truly. I was the quiet, reliable sister who helped her sort through fabric swatches for the bridesmaids' dresses, who listened for hours about the impossible seating chart, who assured her that the slightly off-white of the invitations was indeed the perfect shade of ivory. I was a supporting character in her story, and I had made peace with that role a long time ago. So when the save-the-date for their 5th anniversary party arrived, a thick, cream-colored card with elegant gold script, I felt a genuine flutter of excitement. It wasn't just an anniversary party. It was a grand redo of their wedding, a celebration of their continued success. It was being held at the Claremont, the most exclusive hotel in the city, a place I'd only ever walked past, my reflection a ghost in its gleaming glass doors. The theme was the Roaring Twenties, and the invitation promised an evening of champagne, jazz, and glamour. I immediately texted Alina, "Got the invite. It's gorgeous. I can't wait." Her reply came hours later, a simple thumbs-up emoji. I didn't think much of it. She was busy. She was always busy. In the weeks that followed, I found a vintage flapper dress at a thrift store. It was a delicate, beaded silver thing, a little worn, but it had a beautiful, sad elegance to it. I spent my evenings carefully stitching a few loose beads back on, imagining myself twirling on a dance floor under the lights of a grand ballroom. It was a silly, childish fantasy, but it made me happy. For one night, I wouldn't be just Camilla, the struggling artist, the waitress, the quiet sister. I would be a mysterious guest at a glamorous party. I worked at a small diner on the edge of the city, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that was always just a little too weak. My regulars were kind people, truck drivers and night shift workers who just wanted a hot meal and a friendly face. I painted in my spare time, filling canvas after canvas with images that came from somewhere deep inside me. I never showed anyone my paintings. They were too personal, too raw. They were the only place where I allowed myself to be truly seen, even if only by myself. My apartment was small but cozy. The walls were covered with my own work, a colorful explosion that clashed terribly with the beige walls and brown carpet. My landlord didn't care as long as I painted over them when I left. I had a cat named Mouse, a small gray thing I'd found in the alley behind the diner. She was my only constant companion, and she slept curled on my pillow every night, her tiny purr a comfort in the darkness. Life was simple. It was hard, but it was mine, and I had learned to find joy in small things: a good cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, a day when the tips were good. I didn't need grand parties or expensive things. I just needed to feel like I mattered to someone. And for a long time, I thought I mattered to Alina. Not as much as her friends or her husband or her career, but enough. Enough to be included. Enough to be seen. A week before the event, I hadn't received the formal invitation with the specific time and details. I figured it was lost in the mail. I texted Alina again. Hey, the formal invite never showed. Can you send me the details? This time her reply was quicker, but it was from David. Hey Camilla, Alina is swamped. We're just doing final numbers for the venue. We'll be in touch. Final numbers. The phrase felt cold, transactional. A knot, small and tight, began to form in my stomach. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my own chronic anxiety. I was probably being paranoid. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Alina. My heart did a little leap. See, I was being silly. She was calling to apologize for the mix-up, to gush about the decorations, to ask if I had found a dress. Hey, Elle, I answered, my voice bright. Camilla, her voice was different. It was the voice she used with difficult clients or when she was returning something to a store. It was polite, but utterly devoid of warmth. I need to talk to you about something. Sure, what's up? I said, the knot in my stomach tightening into a hard, cold stone. She took a breath. It's about the party. We've had to make some adjustments to the guest list. It's become much bigger than we anticipated. It's a corporate event now, really. David's biggest clients are coming, some investors from out of town. It's a crucial networking opportunity for him. I waited, the silence stretching between us. Okay, I prompted, not understanding. Camilla, we had to cut it down to a very specific number. It's a business function now. And we've had to make some really tough decisions about who to invite. The words hung in the air, sharp and glittering, like shards of the champagne glass I'd imagined holding. They weren't inviting me. They were uninviting me. You're taking me off the guest list. I whispered, the sound of my own voice foreign to me. It's not personal, Camilla, she said, the most cliché and most insulting phrase in the English language. It's just the reality of the situation. Every seat costs a fortune, and we need to fill them with people who can help David's career. You understand, don't you? It's just one night, just one night. It was just one night. But it wasn't. It was every school play she was too busy to attend. It was every birthday dinner she canceled on. It was every time she introduced me as my sister, Camilla, with a slight, apologetic smile, as if my very existence was something to explain away. This wasn't about a seat. This was about where I stood in her life. I was at the very bottom of the list, below the clients, below the investors, below people she'd probably never even met. What about the family dinner the next day? I asked, a final, pathetic grasp at something. The brunch you mentioned? Oh, that, she said, her voice softening for a fraction of a second. We had to cancel that. The party is going to go so late, we'll all be exhausted. We'll do something soon, okay? We'll have lunch. Lunch. A consolation prize. A quick, cheap meal to make up for being erased from a family milestone. Okay, I said, my voice flat. Okay, Alina, I understand. I hung up before she could say anything else. I didn't want to hear her relief. I sat on my worn-out couch, the silver flapper dress I'd spent so many hours mending lying across my lap. The beads caught the dull afternoon light and winked at me, a cruel mockery of the glittering night I would never have. I didn't cry. The hurt was too deep for tears. It was a cold, hard lump in my chest, a feeling of being so profoundly unseen that I felt like I might disappear entirely. Mouse jumped onto my lap and curled up on the dress, purring loudly. I stroked her soft fur and stared at the wall. For the first time in my life, I felt truly alone. Not just lonely, but alone in the universe, a tiny speck of nothing that no one would notice if I vanished. The night of the party, I couldn't stay in my apartment. The silence was deafening. I put on my old jeans and a sweater and walked down to the river. I sat on a bench and watched the city lights twinkle on the water. Somewhere across town, in the glittering ballroom of the Claremont, my sister was laughing, a champagne flute in her hand, surrounded by people who mattered. And I was here, a ghost on a bench, a forgotten detail. I stayed there for hours, watching the lights, listening to the water lap against the shore. I thought about my mother, who had died when I was 19. She had been a kind woman, worn down by a hard life, but she had always loved Alina and me fiercely. I wondered what she would think of all this. I wondered if she would be disappointed in Alina, or if she would just sigh and say that's just how Alina is. I wondered if she would be disappointed in me, for letting myself be so easily erased. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Camilla, this is Arthur. Arthur Sterling, I need to talk to you. It's urgent. Please call me as soon as you get this. Arthur Sterling. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it. It sounded like a name from a movie, a wealthy, powerful name. I stared at the message, a flicker of curiosity breaking through my wall of sadness, probably a wrong number. I ignored it and put my phone away. But he called again the next morning, and again. Finally, on the third call, I answered, Miss Camilla. Thank God, the voice on the other end was old, refined, and sounded deeply relieved. My name is Arthur Sterling. I was your grandfather's attorney, your biological grandfather. The world tilted on its axis. Grandfather? I had no grandfather. My mom was raised in a series of foster homes. She never knew her parents. I sat down on my kitchen floor, my back against the cabinets. I know this is a shock, the voice continued, gentle now. But your grandfather, William Thorne, passed away 6 months ago. He was a very wealthy man, Miss Camilla. And he has been looking for you for a very long time. He never stopped. The next few hours were a blur of documents and phone calls. Arthur Sterling, a kind, elderly man with a soft voice, explained everything. My mother was the product of a secret affair between William Thorne, a reclusive tech billionaire, and a young woman who died when my mother was a baby. The woman's family, ashamed, gave my mother up, and the connection was lost. But William never forgot. He hired private investigators for decades, but my mother's trail was cold. She had married, divorced, and moved around so much, she was almost impossible to trace. It was only after her death, when a new wave of digital records became available, that they found a link to me. My grandfather, the man I never knew, had died a billionaire, and he had left everything to me, his only living relative, his entire estate. I remember laughing, a strange, hollow laugh that echoed in my tiny kitchen. It was so absurd, so cosmically ironic, that it was either the funniest joke in the world or the most tragic. The sister who had just removed me from her guest list for being a nobody, I was now a billionaire. Arthur came to see me the next day. He was a small, neat man in his 70s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. He brought boxes of documents, photographs, letters. He told me about my grandfather, a man who had built an empire from nothing, who had never married, who had spent his whole life searching for the daughter he lost. He showed me pictures of a stern-faced man with sad eyes, standing in front of factories and computers and buildings I couldn't name. He showed me letters my grandfather had written to private investigators, pleading with them to keep searching. He showed me a photograph of my mother as a baby, wrapped in a blanket, with a handwritten note on the back. My darling girl, I will find you. I cried then. Not for the money, but for the man I never knew, the man who had loved my mother enough to spend a lifetime searching for her. And for my mother, who had died never knowing that someone out there had loved her, had wanted her, had never stopped looking. For weeks, I was in a daze. Arthur, who became my guide and my anchor, walked me through it all. There were mansions I had never seen, stocks and bonds in companies I'd never heard of, art collections, cars. It was a different universe. I moved out of my tiny apartment, not into a penthouse, but into a quiet, comfortable hotel suite while I figured things out. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my coworkers at the diner, and certainly not Alina. I kept working at the diner for a while. It felt normal, grounding. My regulars didn't know anything had changed. They still teased me about my paintings, still left me small tips, still thanked me for their coffee with genuine warmth. Those hours were the only time I felt like myself, like Camilla, not the heir to a fortune I didn't understand. But eventually, I had to leave. The legal matters were too complex, the decisions too many. Arthur needed me to travel, to meet with bankers and lawyers and investment advisors. I gave my notice at the diner, and my coworkers threw me a little party. They gave me a card signed by everyone and a silly apron with paint splatters on it. I cried when I opened it. They had no idea they were saying goodbye to a waitress. They had no idea they were saying goodbye to a billionaire. It wasn't about revenge, not at first. It was about processing. I was grieving a grandfather I never knew, and I was also grieving the sister I thought I had. The money felt like a third person in the room, a huge, silent presence that changed the gravity of everything. How could I just show up at Alina's door and say, "Hey, remember how you uninvited me because I was a nobody?" Well, surprise. A few weeks after the party, my phone rang. It was Alina. I stared at her name on the screen, a wave of old pain washing over me. I let it ring. She called again, and again. Finally, I answered. Camilla. Oh my God, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. Her voice was different from the last time. It was back to the old Alina, the warm, charming one. But it felt louder, more deliberate. Where have you been? I've been so worried. I've been busy, Alina, I said, my voice calm. Well, listen, we need to see you. David and I were just talking, and we feel just terrible about the party. It was a huge mistake. We were under so much pressure, and we made a really poor decision. Can we take you to dinner, our treat, to make it up to you? Our treat, the words were a slap. She was offering to buy me a meal as penance for excluding me. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. Dinner, I said. Yes. How about that new French place downtown? The one that's impossible to get into. David knows the owner. We can go this Friday. I thought about it. The old Camilla would have jumped at the chance, grateful for any scrap of attention. But the old Camilla was gone. The old Camilla had been sitting on a bench by the river, watching the lights of her sister's party from a distance. That's very kind of you, Alina, I said, but I'm busy Friday. Oh, okay. Well, what about Saturday? Busy. Her voice lost a little of its sheen. Camilla, are you mad? I said we were sorry. It was one night. Can't you just get over it? Get over it. The phrase was a key turning a lock inside me, unlocking a door I didn't know was there. Behind it wasn't just sadness, but a quiet, simmering anger. She wasn't sorry for hurting me. She was sorry that I wasn't playing my part anymore. It's not about the party, Alina, I said, my voice steady. It's about what the party represented. It's about a lifetime of being an afterthought. It's about being so low on your list of priorities that I'm not even worth a phone call until I'm inconveniently absent. There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was cold. Wow, okay. I had no idea you felt that way. That's a little dramatic, don't you think? We're family. We don't need to keep score. Family. The word had never felt so hollow. Goodbye, Alina, I said and hung up. This time, I didn't feel the crushing sadness. I just felt free. I threw myself into my new life, but on my own terms. I didn't buy a yacht or a private jet. With Arthur's help, I set up a foundation to help young artists, the kind of kids I used to be, who couldn't afford supplies or studio space. I bought the old, rundown theater in my neighborhood that was about to be torn down and started planning its renovation. I started painting again, not for money, but for the pure joy of it, filling a large, sun-drenched studio with canvases of color and light. For the first time in my life, I had purpose and power. And I was happy. Genuinely, deeply happy. I also started learning about my grandfather. Arthur gave me boxes of his personal effects, journals, letters, photographs. I spent hours going through them, piecing together the life of the man who had given me everything. He was brilliant but lonely, successful but sad. His journals were filled with entries about my mother, about his hope that one day he would find her. The last entry, written just days before his death, said simply, "I am tired, but I will not give up. Somewhere out there my daughter's child is waiting. I feel it. I will find her." I sobbed when I read that. He had died still searching. He had died never knowing that he had succeeded. But he had left everything to me, a granddaughter he had never met, trusting that somehow, someday, I would be found. I made a promise to him then, sitting alone in my hotel room with his journals spread around me. I would honor his memory. I would use his wealth to do good, and I would never forget that I was his legacy. 6 months passed. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Alina again. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. "Camilla, please don't hang up." Her voice was different. It was small, scared. The confident, polished veneer was completely gone. "I need your help. David and I were in trouble." My heart, despite everything, gave a small, traitorous lurch. What kind of trouble? She told me a story that tumbled out in a frantic, disjointed mess. David's investment firm, it turned out, was built on a lie. He had been mishandling client funds for years, taking huge risks to cover up previous losses. It had all come crashing down. The SEC was investigating. They were being sued by dozens of clients. Their house, the cars, everything was being seized. They were facing financial ruin and potentially jail time. "We've lost everything, Camilla," she sobbed. "Everything. We don't know what to do. We have nowhere to go." I listened, a strange calm settling over me. The mighty had fallen. The glittering party at the Claremont, the exclusive guest list, the networking opportunity that was more important than family, it had all been a house of cards. And now it was scattered on the ground. I invited them over. Not to my hotel suite, but to the office of my foundation. It felt like neutral ground. When they walked in, I barely recognized them. Elena, who was always so put together, looked pale and drawn, her eyes red-rimmed. David, the polished financier, looked defeated, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit looking more like a costume he'd been forced to wear. They stood in the middle of the bright, airy office, looking lost. Their eyes swept over the modern art on the walls, the sleek furniture, the staff working in the background. "Camilla," Elena whispered, her eyes wide. "What is this place? What are you doing here?" I gestured for them to sit. I remained standing, leaning against my assistant's desk. "This is the Thorn Foundation," I said calmly. "It supports young artists. I started it a few months ago." Elena's brow furrowed. "Thorn, why would you?" David just stared at me, his face a mask of confusion. The gears were turning in his head, the financier trying to calculate an angle he didn't understand. "Because," I said, looking directly at my sister, "it was my grandfather's name. William Thorn." The silence in the room was absolute. I watched as the information slowly dawned on them. I saw Elena's lips part. I saw David's eyes widen as the name registered. William Thorn, the reclusive tech billionaire, the name that had been in the news for decades. "You," Elena breathed, her voice barely audible. "You're a thorn." "He left me everything," I said, my voice devoid of triumph, just stating a fact. "He'd been looking for our mother his whole life. He found me a few months ago, right around the time of your party, actually." The mention of the party landed like a physical blow. Elena flinched. David's face went pale. The memory of that exclusion, that casual cruelty, now hung in the air between us, a toxic cloud. We didn't know, Camilla," David stammered, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. "We had no idea. How could we have known?" His words were a key turning in another lock. This time, it was the lock on a cage I hadn't even realized I was still in. His implication was clear. If they had known, they would have treated me differently. They would have kept me on the guest list. They would have been nice to me. My worth, in their eyes, was directly proportional to my bank account. It had nothing to do with me being their sister. Elena, to her credit, seemed to understand the horror of this more than David did. She just looked at me, her eyes filling with fresh tears, but these weren't tears of panic. They were tears of shame. "Camilla," she whispered, "I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, Elena?" I asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. "Sorry you uninvited me, or sorry you didn't know I was rich." She didn't have an answer. She couldn't answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know. And in that moment, I think she was seeing herself clearly for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. David, however, was a different story. The shock was wearing off and the businessman was taking over. He leaned forward, a desperate, wheedling look on his face. "Look, Camilla, the past is the past. We're family, and family helps each other. We just need a loan. A bridge loan to cover our legal fees, to pay off some of the smaller investors before this all goes to court. It's a temporary situation. Once we get through this, we can rebuild. A few $1,000,000, that's nothing to you now, right? It would save us. A few $1,000,000, nothing to me." He sat there, in the office of a foundation built to help struggling artists, and asked me for millions to save him from the consequences of his own greed and fraud. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. I looked at Elena. She was staring at her hands, her face burning with humiliation. She didn't look up. She didn't defend him. She didn't join in his plea. She just sat there silent, letting her husband's true colors shine. I stood up straight. I looked at David and then at my sister. "No," I said. The word was simple, quiet, and absolute. David's face fell. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. "I will not give you any money, David. What you did was illegal. It was wrong. You hurt a lot of people. That is not my problem to fix. But we're family." He cried, his voice cracking. "Are we?" I asked. "You made it very clear what your definition of family is. It's a business arrangement. It's based on utility, not love. And by that definition, you have no utility to me. You bring nothing but risk and moral debt." I turned to Elena. She finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. There was no defiance in them, no plea, just a deep, profound shame. "You, Elena," I said, my voice softening just a fraction. "You are my sister. And because you are my sister, I will not let you be homeless. I will pay for a modest apartment for you for 1 year. I will pay for a therapist for you for 1 year. I will pay for career counseling to help you find a job, a real job, doing something on your own. Not as David's wife, not as a society hostess, but as Alina. But that is all. The money will be managed by a trust. You will not have access to a penny of it for anything else. And David is not welcome there. The look on her face was a mixture of relief and devastation. Relief that I wasn't abandoning her entirely, and devastation at the terms. At being separated from the man she had built her entire identity around. David stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and growing fury. You can't do this. You're ruining us. I'm not ruining you, David, I said, my voice calm and final. You did that all by yourself. I'm just choosing not to be ruined with you. I walked to the door and opened it. My assistant will show you out. Alina, I'll have the paperwork drawn up. The choice is yours, they left in silence. David's shoulders were rigid with anger. Alina walked like a woman in a trance. As she passed me, she paused for just a second and whispered, I'm so sorry, Camilla. For everything, I didn't say anything. I just nodded. After the door closed behind them, I walked to the large window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. I thought about the girl on the bench by the river, the girl in the mendied flapper dress, the girl who was invisible to her own sister. That girl was gone. In her place was someone else. Someone who had been given an extraordinary gift, not just of money, but of perspective. The money had given me the power to finally be seen, but more importantly, it had given me the power to see clearly. I saw my sister for who she was, a woman so lost in the pursuit of an image that she had forgotten the substance. And I saw myself for who I had become. Someone who could finally say no, not out of anger or revenge, but out of a quiet, unshakable sense of self-worth. The money hadn't changed who I was. It had just given me the volume to speak my truth. A few days later, Alina called. She had accepted my offer. She was moving into the small apartment I had arranged. She was starting therapy. She hadn't seen David since that day in my office. The authorities were building their case against him, and she was cooperating. It was the first truly honest and difficult thing I had ever seen her do. Months turned into a year. I didn't see Alina often, but we spoke on the phone. The conversations were awkward at first, stilted, full of silences. But slowly, they began to change. She talked about her job, a modest administrative position at a small nonprofit. She talked about her therapist, a kind woman who was helping her unpack a lifetime of decisions made for the wrong reasons. She never asked for money. She never talked about David, who was awaiting trial. She just talked, and I listened. I also began to learn more about my grandfather's life. Arthur took me to the small town where he had grown up, a place in the Midwest with quiet streets and friendly people. We visited the house where he was born, a small farmhouse that was now a museum dedicated to his life. The curator, an elderly woman named Margaret, had known him as a boy. She showed me his childhood bedroom, his school reports, his first computer, a massive thing that took up an entire room. He was always tinkering, Margaret said, her eyes soft with memory, always building something. Even as a little boy, he was different. He saw the world in a way other people didn't. She showed me photographs of him as a young man, serious and intense, but with a kindness in his eyes that reminded me of my mother. She showed me letters he had written to his own mother, full of love and longing. And she showed me a photograph of my mother as a baby, the same one I had seen in Arthur's documents, but this time in a frame on Margaret's desk. He sent me that, she said, when he finally found the photograph. He was so happy. He said, Margaret, I have a daughter. I have a daughter. He carried that photograph with him everywhere until the day he died. I touched the glass of the frame, tracing the outline of my mother's tiny face. She was just a baby, innocent and unaware of the drama that would shape her life. And my grandfather, the man who had loved her from afar, had never stopped searching. I felt a connection to him then, a bridge across time and death, a bond that money could never buy. I decided to write a book about him, not a biography, but a collection of memories, letters, photographs. A tribute to the man who had given me everything, including a family I never knew I had. Arthur helped me gather materials, and Margaret shared her stories. I spent months writing, painting, creating. It became my passion project, my way of honoring his memory and my own journey. One day, Alina invited me to her apartment for coffee. It was a small, clean place in a quiet neighborhood. There were no designer clothes, no fancy furniture, but there was a small vase of fresh flowers on the table and a book of poetry on the arm of the couch. She looked different, softer. The sharp, polished edges were gone. She looked real. We sat at her small kitchen table, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs. The conversation was light, easy. She told me about her job, her therapy, her new friends. She talked about volunteering at a local food bank, something she never would have done in her old life. She laughed at herself, at her own past foolishness, and the sound was genuine and warm. Then she put her mug down and looked at me. "Camilla," she said, her voice steady, "I need to say something and I need you to just listen." I nodded. "I was a terrible sister to you, for our whole lives. I was so consumed with myself, with how things looked, with being a success, that I completely failed you. I used you as my backdrop, my audience. I never saw you. I never wanted to see you, because seeing you would have meant seeing the parts of myself I was trying to outrun. The parts that were scared and insecure." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "When you didn't come to the party, I didn't even think twice. You were just not a factor. And then, when I found out about the money, and I came to you for help, the look on David's face when he asked you for a loan, the way he just assumed you would pay, I saw myself in that moment. I saw how I must have looked to you my whole life, using you, assuming you'd be there." A tear escaped and ran down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand. "You didn't just give me money, Camilla. You gave me a chance to see myself, and what I saw was ugly. But you also gave me a chance to change, and I'm trying. I'm really trying." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her hand was warm and it trembled slightly. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect us to be best friends, but I want you to know that I see you now. I see you, Camilla. Not the billionaire, not the founder of a foundation. I see my sister. And I am so sorry it took losing everything for me to finally open my eyes." I looked at our hands, joined on the simple wooden table. I thought of the silver flapper dress, still hanging in a closet in my home, a reminder of who I had been. I thought of the bench by the river and the cold, lonely night. I thought of the quiet power of saying no and the even greater power of leaving a door open. I squeezed her hand. "I see you too, Alina," I said softly. "For the first time, I see you." We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of years slowly lifting. Then Alina smiled, a real smile, and poured us more coffee. "Tell me about your book," she said. "Arthur told me you're writing about our grandfather." I blinked in surprise. "Arthur told you?" She nodded. "He calls me sometimes. Checks on me. He's a good man. He told me about your project." I'd love to hear about it, so I told her. I told her about my grandfather's childhood, his rise to wealth, his lifelong search for my mother. I told her about Margaret and the farmhouse museum. I told her about the letters and the photographs and the journals. And as I talked, I saw something in Alina's eyes I had never seen before. Interest. Genuine, heartfelt interest. Not in the money, but in the story, in our story. "That's amazing, Camilla," she said when I finished. "Can I see it sometime?" "The book, I mean, it's not finished yet," I said, "but when it is, you'll be the first to see it." She smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. Over the following months, Alina and I continued to rebuild our relationship. It was slow, sometimes painful work. There were moments of tension, old wounds that flared up without warning. But there were also moments of genuine connection, of laughter and shared memories. We talked about our mother, about our childhood, about the paths that had led us to where we were. Alina shared things she had never told anyone, her fears and insecurities, her regrets. And I listened. I listened without judgment, without expectation. I just listened. I also continued my work with the foundation. We expanded our programs, offering grants to young artists, funding community art projects, renovating the old theater into a vibrant cultural center. I poured my heart into it, and it flourished. The day we opened the theater, with a performance by local artists and a crowd of cheering neighbors, I felt my grandfather's presence beside me. I knew he would have been proud. David's trial came and went. He was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Alina didn't attend the sentencing. She had cut all ties with him, finally accepting that the man she had married was not the man she thought he was. It was a painful realization, but it was also freeing. For the first time in her adult life, she was truly on her own. She called me that night, her voice shaky but steady. "I did it, Camilla," she said. I let him go. "For good this time?" "I'm proud of you, Alina," I said. "I know how hard that was." "It was hard," she agreed. "But not as hard as losing you. Not as hard as realizing what I'd done to you. That was harder." We talked for a long time that night, about the past and the future, about hope and healing. And when we finally hung up, I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with money or success. It was the warmth of connection, of family, of love. It was the feeling of being seen. A few months later, I finished my book. I called it The Man Who Never Stopped Searching, and I dedicated it to my grandfather, William Thorne, and to my mother, who never knew how much she was loved. Alina came to the small launch party at the foundation, along with Arthur, Margaret, and a handful of close friends. She stood in the corner, watching me speak, and when I caught her eye, she smiled and raised her glass. After the speeches, she came up to me. "It's beautiful, Camilla," she said, holding a copy of the book. "He would have loved it, and Mom would have been so proud." I hugged her then, a real hug, the kind we hadn't shared since we were children. And for a moment, we were just two sisters, holding each other, united by loss and love and the long, winding road that had brought us here. "Thank you, Alina," I whispered, "for everything." "No," she whispered back, "thank you. For not giving up on me." We pulled apart, wiping tears from our eyes. Arthur came over, beaming, and clapped us both on the shoulder. "Your grandfather would be so happy," he said. "He wanted nothing more than for his family to be together. And now, here you are." "Here we are," I agreed. That night, I went home to my apartment, the one I had finally bought after years of hotels and temporary housing. It was a beautiful place, full of light and art, with a studio where I could paint whenever the mood struck. Mouse, now an old and dignified cat, was curled on her favorite chair. I sat down beside her and picked up a copy of my book, flipping through the pages. On the last page, I had written a final line. A message to my grandfather and to myself. "We are never truly lost," I had written. "As long as someone is searching for us, as long as someone remembers, as long as someone loves us. And now, at last, I am found." I closed the book and looked out the window at the city lights, the same lights I had watched from a bench by the river so long ago. They looked different now. Brighter. Closer. They were my lights now, part of my world, part of my story. My name is Camilla. And for most of my life, that name didn't mean much to anyone. But now it means something. It means resilience. It means forgiveness. It means family. It means love. And that, I have learned, is the greatest wealth of all.